glamorous, dangerous, and deadly in her beauty. Hilda Ferguson entered history sideways, first through a locked bedroom door and then through a body found too late. Long before her name was printed beneath magazine covers or whispered across nightclub tables, it had already appeared in the headlines beside the word murder. And as she rose, she left a trail of question marks no one could quite erase. When the wildest decade burned brightest, she danced inside its glow. When it turned sour, she knew how to slip into the shadows, the prototype of the femme fatale. And disappear she did. Even today, her story has barely been told before. This is not the story of a fallen angel, so much as a woman who learned early how easily angels can be consumed. Welcome to Society Mysteries. Hilda Ferguson was born Hildegard Gibbons on January 16, 1903, in Baltimore, Maryland, the youngest of 6 children in a household that lived close enough to precarity to recognize it on sight. Her father, Robert Lee Gibbons, painted signs for a living, a trade that required steady hands but paradoxically offered very little stability. Her mother, Maria Sterling, bore the classic strain of repeated childbirth and economic uncertainty that many women experienced in those days. Census records tell us that by the time Hildegard was still a child, the family structure had already begun to fracture. At one point, she lived with her mother inside what was euphemistically described as a home for the friendless. This was an institutional refuge for women and children who had slipped between the cracks of family, church, and state. It was not an orphanage exactly, nor a hospital, but a holding pattern for lives in suspension and mothers on the edge. I'd like to make a quick announcement before I go on. I just launched a YouTube members area. If you click the join button below this video, you'll get 2 choices. You can become a HipCat for $2 a month, and this gets you a nice perk, early access to every video. So you can watch it before everyone else and leave me a comment while the room is still quiet. Alternatively, you can become a cool cucumber for $5 a month, which gives you the same benefits, but you also help me out a bit more if you feel you can afford it. Either way, memberships are a huge help and enormously appreciated. Cheers! Let's get back to the main event. There is no record of sentimentality in those early years. What does emerge instead is a sense of urgency. Hildegard learned quickly that survival required motion, performance, and adaptability. So she studied dance while still young, performing in local theatrical productions before adolescence had fully released its soul. By her early teens, she already understood the economy of attention. She knew what bodies could do on stage, what smiles could purchase off it, and how applause functioned as a kind of provisional shelter. Then at 16, she married. On June 2, 1919, Hildegard eloped with Robert Belmont Ugarte, a Honduran-born dental student several years her senior. The marriage had the speed and inevitability of a door closing. Within a year, she was pregnant. Soon after, she gave birth to a daughter, Yolanda Emily Ugarte. It was a domestic life that might have settled someone else. For Hildegard, it felt like confinement. She later described the marriage as abusive, whether physically, emotionally, or both remains unclear. But what is certain is that by 1921, she was gone. She left her husband, she left her infant daughter, she left Baltimore, she left behind her own name. New York offered anonymity and opportunity. By the time her name first appeared in the papers in June 1922, she had become Hilda Ferguson, a chorus girl performing in a bathing beach revue at Murray's Cabaret on West 42nd Street. Prohibition-era Manhattan was an ecosystem that rewarded speed and, at the same time, punished hesitation. It was a world where everyone spoke at 100 miles per hour, never failed to look over their shoulders for a threat, and was filled with every nationality, every distraction and every danger. Cabarets blurred into speakeasies, producers drank with bootleggers, chorus girls learned to dance around propositions as deftly as they navigated choreography. Hilda moved fast, perfectly in rhythm with the city's murky, complex step. That autumn, she made her Broadway debut in the Music Box Revue of 1922 to 1923, an Irving Berlin production that placed her squarely inside the machinery of modern American entertainment. The timing could not have been better, or in another way, worse. By 1923, Florenz Ziegfeld, impresario, aesthete, and architect of a very particular kind of American glamour, cast Hilda as a Ziegfeld Follies girl. It was the summit for a dancer of her type. Visibility without responsibility, beauty framed by excess. She would appear in the Follies of 1923, 1924, and 1925, sharing the stage with Fanny Brice and Will Rogers, while the country staggered through its collective and clandestine intoxication. Her specialty was a shimmy routine called the Great Shimmy Dance, performed beneath an extravagant feathered headdress, her body moving in ways that suggested looseness without surrender, a perfect seductive mix. By her early 20s, she was a fixture. She was photographed by Alfred Cheney Johnston, featured on the cover of Theatre magazine, albeit known less for dialogue than for presence. She flitted with the other Broadway Butterflies all along the Great White Way, show to show, speakeasy to speakeasy, dawn to dawn. They gave her a nickname, The Body, and this raw sex appeal made news over at America's other great spectacle of the era, Hollywood. Tiffany Pictures had been founded by Mae Murray and was a major player among the studios of early Hollywood. Tiffany also specialized in raunchy, for the era, romantic films with titles like Pleasures of the Rich, Jazzmania, and That Model from Paris. Hilda seemed like a perfect fit, but unlike so many others, she flatly turned Hollywood down. New York was her town, and she was bound to it in all its electricity and grit. She was happy to leave the sunshine and clean air to other girls, it seems. But maybe there were other reasons she chose to stay, men that wouldn't allow her to close any doors so easily on them. And then, in March 1923, the door locked behind her. Hilda was living in her Manhattan apartment on West 57th Street with Dorothy Dot King, a model and party girl who moved through New York with the same reckless ease. The two women shared not only a residence, but a bed. This was a practical arrangement in a city where space was expensive and privacy negotiable. They were known as chums, a word that concealed more than it revealed. Their nights were loud, their friendships volatile. Neighbours later recalled shouting matches, late arrivals, men coming and going at all hours, and many emptied their wallets before they closed the doors. Dot was, so Hilda claimed, the wilder of the two, although police records have it that as many complaints were filed against Hilda as Dot. Heroin floated through the small, stylish apartment, as did a constant parade of stage door Johnnies, medium-time crooks and gangsters, and their sharply bobbed flapper friends. By the end of February, Hilda had had enough and moved out. The next thing she knew was horror and sensation. On the morning of March 15th, Dot King was found dead by a maid, chloroformed in her bedroom, one arm wrenched behind her back, wearing nothing but a tiny silk chemise. The murder was immediate sensation. Dot was young, attractive, and entangled with wealthy and dangerous men whose money travelled smoother than their reputations. The press dubbed it the Broadway Butterfly murder, a phrase that fused beauty and disposability into a single breath. Police descended, reporters followed, and at the centre of it all stood Hilda Ferguson, recent roommate, confidant, sometime adversary. Investigators learned that Hilda and Dot had quarrelled shortly before the murder. They learned Hilda had moved out 2 weeks earlier. They learned that witnesses had seen a woman violently pulling Dot by the hair days before her death. And then, almost as if on cue, they learned that Hilda Ferguson had quietly left the country. She sailed for Europe immediately after Dot's funeral. If this was an innocent move, then the timing was catastrophic. Headlines speculated openly. Was she fleeing scrutiny, protecting someone else, or simply doing what she had always done, leaving before circumstances could pin her in an awkward place? When she returned aboard the legendary Mauretania on August 3, 1923, photographers captured her smiling on the pier, stylish and unrepentant. The caption beneath one widely circulated image identified her not as a dancer, but as, quote, the chum of Dorothy King. That tag would follow her longer than any stage credit. Hilda was questioned. She denied everything. She was never charged. And she never, to her dying day, explained what she knew. The murder remained unsolved. So did her silence. Incredibly, her career did not collapse. Ziegfeld kept her on. If anything, the scandal somehow sharpened her intoxicating allure. In the Follies, mystery functioned as a kind of currency, and Hilda now possessed it in abundance. But something in her trajectory did alter. The stage no longer seemed like an endpoint. It became a platform for grander, more dangerous ambitions. By the mid-1920s, Hilda Ferguson was as well known for who she dated as for where she danced. She exited the Follies and soon announced plans to marry Aaron Benesch, a Baltimore millionaire more than twice her age. Society pages framed it rather kindly as a Cinderella story, but privately it was transactional, unstable and short-lived. Benesch broke it off. He married another showgirl instead. Hilda absorbed the blow without public collapse, but the message was clear. Marriage was not her escape route. She turned instead toward men who dealt in power rather than propriety. Among her reported lovers were actor George Raft and composer Arthur Gershwin. And if you want to know about Raft, check out the recent Hollywood Mysteries episode on him, which I'll link in the description. But the most consequential relationship of her life began with Enoch Nucky Johnson, the political boss and bootlegging monarch of Atlantic City. Nucky was wealth in suited motion, cash-heavy, ostentatious, and insulated by corruption. He installed Hilda as the featured attraction at his nightclub, called the Silver Slipper for his Cinderella, and housed her in luxury at the Ritz-Carlton. He bought her a Rolls-Royce. He draped her in mink. For a while, she was his reigning favorite, a blonde emblem of excess in a city built on illegal pleasure. Hilda adapted seamlessly. Atlantic City suited her. The rules were looser, the men more dangerous, the stakes clearer. One night, spotting Nucky's new mistress at Texas Guinan's club in New York, Hilda bought a $25,000 diamond bracelet off Guinan's arm on the spot. Cash only, not because she wanted it, but because she wanted to win right in front of her rival's face. It was quite a gesture, both theatrical and brutal, a reminder that she understood the language of dominance better than most men in the room. For Hilda, it was a minor indulgence, another glittering trinket to add to her collection of jewels that had already been valued at more than $1 million. But even Nucky moved on. He always did. By the close of the 1920s, Hilda was once again in New York, orbiting the underworld rather than Broadway, and the lightning bolts were landing closer to her than ever before. Most notoriously, she was present at the Park Central Hotel the night Arnold Rothstein was shot. Rothstein had been New York's elite Jewish mob kingpin, known for his incredible manipulative powers, as well as for rigging the 1919 World Series. Next, she became involved with Willie McCabe, an Irish-American bootlegger and Rothstein associate. The pattern was unmistakable now. Hilda moved through a world where violence was always one crooked poker game, one argument, one askance look away. The bill came due in February 1931. At the 61 Club, during a late-night brawl, McCabe was stabbed and gravely wounded. Hilda was with him. Police took her in as a material witness. In court, when asked what she had seen, she replied lightly, "My dear, I was in the ladies' room." Hilda knew the rules of the game, never talk. The judge bristled at Hilda's omerta. Bail was set at $5,000. She spent the night in the women's prison. The next day, a racketeer posted her bond, explaining with a deep shrug, "She used to work for me." Hilda never returned to testify. She forfeited the bail. Broadway took note, and so did the police. From there, the descent was swift and largely unrecorded. By her late 20s, she was drinking heavily. The shows were gone. The men were fewer. The money evaporated. She resurfaced in Baltimore, ill and nearly broke, before seeking treatment in New York. Then she moved to Florida, where papers reported her as saying she was tired of the white lights. "I love the country and the glorious sunshine," she said. "Nature, lovely nature." But like so many refugees from the Roaring Twenties, the 1930s had not been kind to her. The rules had shifted, life became harder, morals closed in. The public were hungry, and no longer willing to tolerate flappers, crooks, and dancing girls. The good times were over. The drinking worsened. It was not the playful intoxication of the jazz age, but something more solitary and compulsive. She drank straight gin, heavily and without ceremony, no longer in clubs designed to watch her, but in rooms where no one cared. She had once been described as, quote, the blonde darling of the underworld who could pour an incredible amount of straight gin through her pert rosebud lips. But her body, once photographed as spectacle, began to betray her. The press occasionally referred to her nervous condition, a phrase that functioned as a polite screen for physical collapse and severe addiction. In truth, her decline was neither mysterious nor dramatic. It was simply relentless. In September 1933, her condition worsened sharply. She traveled back to New York for medical care and was admitted to New York Hospital. Doctors diagnosed peritonitis, a severe infection of the abdominal lining, often fatal at the time and frequently the result of a ruptured appendix or untreated internal injury. There was nothing romantic about it. No scandal, no spectacle, just pain, fever, and a body that finally refused to keep pace with the life it had carried. Hilda died in Baltimore on October 3rd, 1933, 30 years old, in a hospital room far from any spotlight. The newspapers struggled to frame her passing. Some reported heart trouble, others alluded vaguely to exhaustion. Nearly all mentioned Dorothy King. Even in death, Hilda could not be disentangled from the unsolved murder that had marked her at 20. She was buried in Loudon Park Cemetery in Baltimore in an unmarked grave. There were no crowds, no Broadway delegations, no gangland wreaths. The men who had once fought over her attention were gone, dead, married, or uninterested in remembrance. What remained was silence. For several years after her death, Hilda Ferguson existed only as a cautionary reference, a name pulled from memory when writers catalogued the casualties of the jazz age. In the 1940s and 1950s, when nostalgia softened the edges of the 1920s, she reappeared in syndicated columns and expose-style books. These accounts were rarely generous. They emphasized her drinking, her associations, her refusal to talk. She was described as the blonde darling of the underworld, a phrase that managed to sound both admiring and dismissive. The implication was clear. She had lived too fast, chosen poorly, and paid accordingly. And yet the story refused to close. In a strange echo of her life, Hilda's name resurfaced through her daughter. Yolanda Emily Ugarte, the child Hilda had left behind as an infant, reached adulthood with only fragments of knowledge about her mother. In the late 1930s, Yolanda attempted to enter the theatre world under a stage name, Hilda Ferguson no less. The resemblance was reportedly striking. Broadway columnists noted it immediately, with a mix of curiosity and unease. Here was the past returning, not as memory, but as embodiment, the abandoned little girl, following in the tragic footsteps of her dead mother. Yolanda's career was brief and mercifully lacked the recklessness that had defined her mother's ascent. She married young, divorced, and eventually married into wealth, stepping away from performance altogether. But the moment lingered. The name Hilda Ferguson reappeared once again, in print like a ghost. Only this time not attached to murder or scandal, but to reinvention. It was as close as the story came to revision. In the decades that followed, Hilda's presence has become more abstract, as she has fallen into a curious obscurity. She appeared in crime histories dissecting the Broadway Butterfly murder. She surfaced in memoirs about the Follies, usually as an example of beauty undone by excess. She inspired fictionalized characters in novels and films that blurred fact and invention. Her life, compressed and distorted, became shorthand for a particular type of jazz-age woman. Ambitious, unprotected, spectacular, and brutally disposable. What makes Hilda Ferguson enduring is not that she was exceptional on stage. She was not a star in the traditional sense. She did not define a genre or leave behind a body of work. Her dances vanished with the footlights that framed them. What endures instead is the clarity with which her life exposes the error that consumed her. When the party ended, there was no mechanism to catch her fall. Hilda understood, perhaps better than anyone, that silence could be both shield and sentence, and she chose it anyway. Alright, I thought this was a particularly fascinating story that hasn't been covered very often before, so I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments. I love to have a chat down there with you all. I've been Chester, and I'll see you next time.